it has been a constant collaboration between the center and our IUM Center for Islamic Economics in UAE. I would also like to welcome our guest today, and he's not somebody who is new to IRCF, and he's not also new to IUM CIE, and he's also not new to the Kulliyah of Economics and Management Sciences, and that is Dr. Hafaz Furqani. And mashallah, you're welcome, Dr. Hafaz.
Thank you.
You're always, alhamdulillah, at our heart. Normally we see you in different programs, but you are here. And Dr. Hafaz, for your information, was supposed to join us in March before the COVID-19 with the help of Triple IT, who is also our partner. And I think that was organized previously under the leadership of Prof. Dr. Aslam with Triple IT. He was supposed to join us, but TJD, for reasons which Allah knows, and hopefully, inshallah, still the door is open with Triple IT, and I'm sure a lot of Triple IT representatives are there. We'll be knocking at their door to see how Hafaz will come in. So this series has been a series on Islamic economics. And I think the last one before the COVID was held at UAE face-to-face, also in collaboration between IRCF and CIE, IIM CIE. And it was very fruitful. We had a lot of participation from our distinguished guests and lecturers, and also participants from outside. It was something to do with the concepts of Islamic economics from At-Turath. And this time, alhamdulillah, we are moving one step forward with somebody who is, a specialist in the area, specialized in the area, Dr. Hafaz Furqani. He will take us to the philosophy and specifically focusing on defining Islamic economics. So this session today will be moderated by Dr. Riyasat. And also Riyasat, whenever you talk about Riyasat, then you talk about debating. You talk about, international scenes in debate. So before we give to Dr. Riyasat, I would like to kindly invite Dr. Latifa for just a short opening remark, and then inshallah we'll begin the session. You're welcome, Dr. Latifa.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Mustafa, and thank you for Center of Islamic Economics from IIUM for the collaboration in order for us to have this discussion. So this discussion started with idea of revisiting the philosophy of Islamic economics. So we have discussed with some of the scholars of Islamic economics from IIUM, from UKM, and also from some other universities, in order to come out to revisit back on the philosophy of Islamic economics. And then we have few series. Earlier, we have first series we held in quiz. Prof. Aslam has presented on philosophy of Islamic economics. And second series was held in IIUM, presented by Dr. Mustafa on the concept from concept of Islamic economics from Quran and Sunnah. And the third series is going to present by Dr. Hafaz on the definition of Islamic economics. So we have few series that related to the philosophy of Islamic economics. In order for us later at the end, after we complete all the series, maybe we can come into one consensus that we will discuss further in the future. So this is just an attempt to revisit the philosophy of Islamic economics. So inshallah, hopefully today we will hear the discussion on the definition of Islamic economics from Dr. Hafaz Furqani, and then you can ask questions later, inshallah. So thank you, Dr. Hafaz, and also thank you IIUM Center, especially Center of Islamic Economics, in order accept to collaborate with International Center of Islamic Economics and Finance in Quiz, yeah, to revisit the philosophy of Islamic economics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Latifa. And once again, also, I welcome all our international viewers and who are listening and following this program. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank my PA, Brother Firdaus, who had tirelessly worked to ensure that this Zoom is on and the platform is on. So this session is expected to take around 1.5 hours. So now I give the burden to Dr. Riyasat to manage the time and manage the session. Please welcome Dr. Riyasat Amin Imon. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa ahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Thank you, Dr. Latifa, Director of IRC IEF Quiz, and Dr. Mustafa, Director of CIE IIUM, both very familiar faces and giants in the discipline. Thank you also to the IRC IEF Council members who took out the time, for joining us. And they include, some of our most prominent minds in Islamic economics today. It is indeed an honor for me to be able to moderate this session in your presence. I would also like to welcome all the viewers, scholars, students, practitioners from all ends of the earth who are taking interest in this project of ours. And I hope it proves to be a fruitful session for all of us. As many of you already know, as Dr. Mom mentioned, Dr. Mustafa mentioned, I'm Dr. Riyasat Amin, a recent addition to the IIUM Economics Department. I'm a lecturer in Economic Development and Islamic Economics. I'm also a research fellow at the CIE, and on the side, I train our debaters as well. But this is not a session about me. So let me introduce our esteemed speaker, Dr. Hafaz Furqani. So first of all, I'd like to say that, it's not easy to summarize, a 10-page CV that is full of accomplishments. And I really hope that, I'm able to do justice to his qualifications. Luckily, most of us know Dr. Hafaz Furqani, so he doesn't really require an introduction. But, currently, he's a lecturer at the Faculty of Islamic Economics and Business at Ar-Raini State Islamic University in Aceh. Right? He's an alumnus of IIUM, as Dr. Mustafa mentioned earlier, and he has dedicated himself to the field of Islamic economics research since his early days as a student. And as a result, he's a very prolific writer. He has accumulated close to 200 works in reputed journals and in the form of book chapters and conference and research papers. So, a lot of literature contributed to him by him to the discipline. It is not only about quantity, though, for Dr. Hafaz either. He has also won different literary and academic scholarship awards in excellence, including the Emerald Literary Awards more than once, the Yayasan Khazanah Malaysia Scholarship Award, right, and the Rector's Fellowship Award on more than one occasion as well. And these are just some of the things that he has won. So before handing the floor over to Dr. Hafaz, I'll just go over the itinerary for everyone's benefit. So first, Dr. Hafaz will speak or present for 30 minutes. And then after that, we'll have a Q&A session. All right, this will be for about 10 minutes. Those of you who have questions, all right, kindly direct those questions through the chat box. I'll be monitoring that, okay, and I'll be choosing the more pertinent questions from there. And after the Q&A session, we'll have a more focused discussion by the Economics Council members, right, about some of the finer issues. This will be for another, 10 to 20 minutes. The main aim of this session is to have an open and inclusive discourse about the definition of Islamic economics, so that everybody may be on the same page and, we may benefit equally. So try to, participate as much as possible If there's a question that you think is pertinent, then forward the question, and I'll do my best to make sure that gets included in the session. Inshallah, let's hope that Allah blesses the session and we're able to arrive at a clearer idea of what Islamic economics is supposed to be about. And let's hope that it's a good follow-on session to the earlier part of the series, the Turath, the discussion on the Turath. So without any further delay, let us start the second part, right? And I have the pleasure of inviting, Dr. Hafaz to continue. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Let me put first my PowerPoint presentations. I think, yeah. Okay, hopefully everybody can see the PowerPoint presentation. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I hope my voice is clear. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin, wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa ashabi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. First of all, I would like to thanks Dr. Mustafa Umar Muhammad, the director of Center for Islamic Economics, International Islamic University, Malaysia, for this wonderful opportunity, and also Dr. Latifah Bibi, the director of IRSIF in College University Islam Selangor. Thanks for the invitations, and to the moderator, Dr. Yasat Amin, and also not to forget my Professor Dr. Muhammad Aslam Hanif, who is my supervisor. Actually, what I am going to present today is actually comes from my PhD dissertation, which is supervised or guided by Professor Muhammad Aslam Hanif. Yeah? And this has been a very long process paper, because I have refined it in several ways, from my early version in my dissertations until it is published in the Turkish Journal of Islamic Economics. And this paper basically tried to talk a very basic of Islamic economics, which is the question of what is Islamic economics. So I try to not to define by myself what is Islamic economic actually, but I try to compile or classify the definition proposed by many scholars of Islamic economics. And if we go through, I have go through, at least we have 22 definitions of Islamic economics. And the definitions is very, different from one perspective to another perspective. But if we classify, we can see some convergence of thought among the scholars on what is Islamic economics. Professor Umar Chapra, in his paper, when he received the IDB prize winner in 1995, he wrote a paper on what is Islamic economics. So in that paper, he tried to clarify what is Islamic economics and try to answer some of the confusions on whether we need to have a specific definition on Islamic economics or not. So clearly, according to Prof. Chapra, we need to have a specific definition of Islamic economics. But this is not the case for some other scholars, such as Laliwala, for example. He says that Islamic definition of economic should not be separated from the general definition of economics. And Fahim Khan also mentioned that this is because we have the same subject matter with the conventional economics. So since we have the object of study is similar, which is to study the human behavior, then there is no need for a specific definition of Islamic economics, even though Fahim Khan later on also come up with his own definition of Islamic economics. But majority of scholars believe that we need to have a specific definition of Islamic economics. And why we need to have that specific definition of Islamic economics, according to Arif, is because of to put a scientific justification for the disciplines, and also for further development of Islamic economics. So according to Muhammad Arif, unless we have a clear perspective on what is Islamic economics, so this discipline we cannot move further on the scientific basis for the disciplines, because there is no strong justifications on why we need to have these new disciplines. So at least there are two reasons on why we need to define Islamic economics. The first is we have to clarify what we mean by Islamic economics. What is the nature of Islamic economics? What are the subject matter? And then what are the scope? What are the boundaries? And what are the methodologies? Or what are the aspirations brought by Islamic economics? So this must be clear first before we talk further about the body of knowledge, before we talk about the methodology of Islamic economics and etc. Secondly, why we need to define Islamic economic is because we have to clarify the difference of Islamic economics or our economics with the other economics. So of course, every disciplines, they have specific definitions. Economics in conventional or in capitalist perspective has a definition which is now definitions by Lionel Robbins dominate the scientific development. And also in the socialist perspective or in Marxist perspective, they define also the disciplines. So Islamic economics, in order to distinguish itself with the other economics, we also have to define our Islamic economics, not only to define, but in that definition, it should be clear what are the differences of Islamic economics with the other economics. And this is very important. Later on, if we go through what are the definitions proposed by scholars, we can see the way they differentiate our disciplines with other disciplines is very, very clear. But there are some differences in how they differentiate it. But then the question is how, if there is a need to define Islamic economics, the next question is that how to define Islamic economics. So some scholars have discussed this. For example, Abbas Mirakhor. Abbas Mirakhor argues that to define Islamic economics, we need to have appropriate language and terminology. In other words, we need to have unique or specific terminologies which are unique to Islamic economics. Why we need to have that? The terminology for Abbas Mirakhor will be the framework, will be the platform for us to discuss Islamic economics in our cases. So, for example, if we look back, the definition of economics proposed by Lionel Robbins, for example, he found a very specific terminology, which is scarcity. So that really is the basis later on to discuss Islamic economics, the subject matter of Islamic economics, and then the theory developed later on is based on how we can solve the problem of scarcity. So is there any specific terminology that could be proposed by scholars? So that will be the frameworks or the common platform for Islamic economics to move on. So in this case, later on, we see some definition proposed, for example, the word falah, or the word maqasid sharia in the definition. I believe that why they do that, they try to find some unique terminologies for Islamic economics. And then Masudul Alam Chaudhuri, for example, also argues that to define Islamic economics, we must have a Tawhidic perspective, of a unity frameworks and an integrated perspective in the definition of Islamic economics, where the subject matter, their solutions and goals to be achieved are integrated. So Prof. Chaudhuri is specific, very unique to him also, that he wants to bring this Tawhidic perspective in the definition so that we can have a integrated or united view on the problems of economics, and then the solution to solve the problems, and then the goals, what are we going to achieve in this economics. So, but the challenge will be is what Timur Quran mentioned. In 1995, he wrote an article and says that Islamic economic does not offer a comprehensive framework for a modern economy. For all its grand claims, it presents a package of loosely connected policies rather than a complete blueprint for reform. It fails to provide a well-defined and operational method of analysis. Islamic economic is mostly prescriptive, and where efforts are made to give it analytical power, it loses much of its Islamic character. I think what Timur Quran has mentioned is sum up the challenge that should be answered by Islamic economists when they try to define or try to clarify the nature of the disciplines and what are the mission of Islamic economics. Because this statement is very strong statements that until now, I think Islamic economic is yet to answer it in a very comprehensive perspective. Even though just now I put a quotation from Professor Masud Al-Chowdhury, yeah, this is so this statement basically is trying to answer what Timur Quran has put his claim just now. So the answer will be, according to Prof. Masud Al-Chowdhury, is in we have to develop our disciplines in the Tawhidic perspective so that we can have a comprehensive perspective on how we solve the problems and what we are going to study and what are the goals to be achieved. But again, this statement is a very strong statement that we are still currently still have not yet a solid answer, I think, in my opinion, to these claims. With regard to the definition of Islamic economics, and if we can learn from the conventional economics, how conventional economics develop their own definition. So basically, the definition of the discipline is a process of ex ante and ex post. So it is a combination of ex ante and ex post process. What I mean is that we have queries whether we try to propose the definition first before we study Islamic economics, or we just study Islamic economics naturally, then the definitions will come out later on. So basically, if we learn from the conventional economics, the definition of economic itself take a very long and religious intellectual process. And the definition developed in pace with the development of the discipline itself. So it took 100 years from Adam Smith to Lionel Robbins, and then the scholars get a consensus when Lionel Robbins proposed his definition of economics. So for that reasons, the definition is always evolutionary. It is an evolutionary process. So every scholars just try to put their best on how to define Islamic economics, but then it is up to the scientific community or the Islamic economic scientific community to choose what definitions are appropriate. So when they choose it and they get the consensus, then the disciplines we can have a very what I can say is that a very good movement in the development of the disciplines. So Adam Smith, for example, defined in 1776 economic as the study of wealth. Then John Stuart Mill also tried to bring economics to the political economy. And then in 1890, Alfred Marshall defined economic as a study of mankind in the ordinary business life. And this definition maintained quite some times until later on in 1931, Lionel Robbins challenged the definition proposed by Alfred Marshall in which Robbins says that economy is the science which studies human behavior as a relationship between ends and scarce means, which have alternative uses. Yeah? So the definition proposed by Robbins put us a framework on how we study economics. Eh? So it's very interesting, whereby currently he proposed some key terminologies. For example, scarcity, scarce means, and ends. Yeah? If you compare relative to the ends, then the human being will face the problems of scarcity. And to face the problem of scarcity is about how we make a choice or decision, and this is very much related to human behavior. So economics will help human beings to make a good choice or to make a good decisions. Yeah? And many scholars agreed with this definition, and it survived until currently. Yeah? In economics textbooks, this definition is still becomes an agreed definitions that we study. Even though Beckhaus and Medema, they said that Robbins' definition of economics remains the most widely cited definition of the subjects, but it has never commanded universal sense, and there have always been significant numbers of economists who have considered that it does not encompass all aspects of their disciplines and that qualifications or extensions are required. As the definition of field generally comes only after the field is established, as field change, so definition change. So many scholars in the West also believe that what Robbins has proposed is actually a temporary definitions or professional definitions. Another definitions will come up if the scientific community feels that the current or the existing definition is unable to answer the current problems or the current phenomena. So they need to enlarge the discipline. So they will propose new definitions. But according to Beckhaus and Medema, again, we have seen so many definitions proposed after Robbins. But again, these new definitions unable to compete with the Leonard Robbins definitions. So if we talk about the definition of Islamic economics, how we define Islamic economics. Here, I tried to do some research to observe how the scholars define Islamic economics. First, they try to do hard, which is clarifications within the discipline itself. What are the limits for these Islamic economics studies? So the scholars in this regard try to clarify the nature, scopes, and boundaries of Islamic economic disciplines. And secondly, they try to do fasal, which means they try to clarify the differences or the differentia of the disciplines with other disciplines. So in this case, Islamic economists try to distinguish Islamic economics with the mainstream economics. So how they differentiate this, their definition of Islamic economic with other disciplines? Sometimes they put it in the approach, sometimes they put it in the solution, and even sometimes they try to bring another new subject matter for Islamic economics. If we compare with the conventional economics. So these are the way Islamic economists try to develop the definition of Islamic economics. So again, as I mentioned just now, that I have collected about 22 definitions of Islamic economics proposed by the scholars. So my study is up until 2015. If we know it is in 2020, of course, there are many other scholars also now try to define Islamic economic, which is out of scope of these studies. So I can classify into 4 types definition of Islamic economics. The first type, Islamic economic, is defined by the scholars as the study of Islamic principles or doctrines in economics. This proposed by some scholars, in which I just put it 3. In fact, in the paper it's more than 3. Bakir Sadar, for example, define Islamic economic as the way Islam prefers to follow in the pursuit of its economic life and in the solution of its practical economic problems in line with its concept of justice. So I put a red mark here to signify the doctrine or the principles. Muhammad Abdullah Al-Arabi define Islamic economic as a set of principles derived from the Quran and Sunnah and construct the economics based on those principles according to times and places. And then Asad Zaman define Islamic economic as the effort or struggle to implement the orders of Allah pertaining to economic affairs in our individual life, micro, in our communities, meso, and at the level of ummah, macro. So this type of definition consider the subject matter of Islamic economic as the Islamic doctrine of economics. So we study Islamic economic means that we study the doctrine of economic in Islam. So then the focus of study is in deriving the doctrines, in outlining the doctrines, and in applying the doctrines or principles, injunctions, and rules of Islam in analyzing economic realities and in solving economics problems. So the point of departure here is the doctrine of Islam in economics. So it is very clear if we read the books of Bakir Sadar, and it is very clear also if we read the articles by Asad Zaman. And then the second type definition of Islamic economics. Islamic economics as the study of ways to realize Islamic objective in economics. So Islamic objective in economics. For example, we can see in the definition proposed by Muhammad Akram Khan, he mentioned Islamic economics aims at the study of human falah achieved by organizing the resources of earth on the basis of cooperation and participation. Omar Chapra defined Islamic economic as a branch of knowledge which help realize human well-being through an allocation and distribution of scarce resources that is in conformity with the maqasid, without unduly curbing individual freedoms, creating continued macroeconomics and ecological imbalance, or weakening family and solidarity of moral fiber of the society. So the subject matter of Islamic economic in this second type of definition is that the Islamic objective of economics. So this type of definition proposed by scholars who are keeping arguments that Islamic economic is a goal-oriented discipline. So unlike the conventional economic, which is neutral towards ends or neutral toward goals or values, Islamic economic is very explicit in values and in terms of goals. What are we going to achieve? So therefore, the focus of study of Islamic economic is to explore and investigate the Islamic economic objectives and propose approach and mechanism in solving economic problems. So very good books wrote by Saifuddin Taqeldin about the Maqasid foundation of market economics and how this goal can lead can be studied analytically in Islamic economics to achieve the goals. So it's very interesting. And type 3, Islamic economic as the study of ways to solve economic problems in the Islamic frameworks. This is this definition proposed by Professor Muhammad Aslam Hanif. Islamic economic is an approach to interpreting and solving men's economic problems based on the values, norms, laws, and institutions found in and derived from the sources of knowledge in Islam. Abdul Manan, Islamic economic is a composite social science which studies the problems of production, distribution, and consumption through integrative system of exchange and transfer over time and their social and moral consequences in the light of Islamic rationalism. Zamir Iqbal and Lewis, Islamic economic is a branch of knowledge that aims at analyzing, interpreting, and resolving economic problems with reference to the methodology of Islam. So the subject matter of Islamic economics in this regard is the economic problems. So Islamic economics studies economic problems in Islamic perspective, because if we see the definition, the scholars always try to tie with the Islamic perspective, Islamic definition, Islamic approach, and Islamic solution in solving the economics problems. Okay, next, the last typology, type 4, Islamic economic as the study of human or Islamic man behavior in making choices and definition and decision. This proposed by scholars such as Muhammad Arif. Islamic economic is the study of Muslim behavior who organize the resources which are a trust to achieve falah. And then Naqvi, Islamic economic is a study of the representative Muslim behavior in modern Muslim society. And then Monzir Kaf, Islamic economic is the study of economics behavior of men and women as individual economic agent and as communities and collective entities. And then Fahim Khan, Islamic economic is a study of human behavior relating to the attainment of material requisites of well-being. So in this regard, the subject matter of Islamic economic is human behavior in making choices and decision. So this type of definition, there are some similarities with the definition proposed by Leonel Robbins, whereby the subject matter of Islamic economic is similar to the conventional economics, namely to study the human behavior in making choices and decision. And basically the problems are similar, which is the problem of scarcity, and then the problems of consumption, production, and distribution. But the difference is that in studying the behavior, we are studying it in the light of Islamic norms, in the light of Islamic solution also, and then norms and approach built from Islamic principles. So just now the scholars try to differentiate, differentiate in how we study behavioral framework in Islamic perspective. For example, Muhammad Arif tried to put falah as a framework, and then Monzir Kaf also, and then Fahim Khan also, they try to differentiate how we study behavior in conventional perspective and Islamic perspective. So we can see just now about what I can try to classify. There are four classifications of definition of Islamic economics. The first is Islamic economic study Islamic doctrine or principle in economics. The second, Islamic economic studies Islamic goals or Islamic objectives. The third, study economic problems. And the fourth studies the behavior of human being. Sometimes they put it very explicit, the Muslim behavior. But other scholars try to make it in a broader framework, the human behavior. But there are common lines. If we can see, there are some common lines or common agreements among the scholars in the definition of Islamic economics. The first I can say is that in conventional economics, the means and ends are not interrelated. So economics is focusing on means only, but ends are left to the policymakers, or even to the communities, because ends are neutral. So, but in Islamic economic cases, we have proven just now that when the scholars define Islamic economics, they always try to integrate the means and ends in our study of Islamic economics. And then realities and ideas also are interconnected in the Islamic perspective. For example, when we discuss about the subject matter of economics, so what we mean by the economic problems, according to scholars, is not only about the facts or realities that we are facing. For example, poverty, scarcity, or unemployment, or social justice. We always try to relate it with the Islamic ideals on how we should solve the problems of poverty, for example, on how we can achieve the problems of social justice. So there is always in the definitions provided by the scholars try to integrate on realities and ideals or Islamic ideals. So it is very clear that the Islamic economics scholars try to propose an integrative approach in the definition of Islamic economics, whereby we study the problems in line with the Islamic solution or Islamic goals and Islamic approach proposed by or we can derive from the Quran and Sunnah. So basically that's all for the definition of Islamic economics. Hopefully this could trigger us further, can give us new ideas on how we can develop Islamic economics, on how we can clarify our disciplines of Islamic economics. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As a moderator, I can't say how pleased I am that you finished, exactly on 29 minutes. So alhamdulillah, the timing was perfect. And at the same time, I thought that you were able to cover an incredible amount of ground in a very short time and, still keep the audience on board. So, it was very enlightening for me, the different definitions and seeing them from your perspective, because I've come across most of these definitions myself. But the way you've broken them down and analyzed them, it's truly, unique and very insightful. So alhamdulillah. I'm just looking at the question section. So there are a few coming in right now. So the first one is by Brother Afrad Arifin, Lembang Bandung. I know him quite well. He's very active in all these circles. And there's always a question from him, guaranteed. Anyway, so his question is, whether Islamic economics is Islamic teaching or a social science. Okay, so please share your opinion with us, Prof. That's his request. So would you define Islamic economics as, a teaching science or a social science? Should we collect the questions, or I think maybe address one by one? And
okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Brother Afrad. Of course, yeah, we know him because he's very active also in all these webinar series. Thank you for questions. Whether Islamic economy is Islamic teaching or social science. And this question has been asked previously by, if I'm not mistaken, is by Volker House. Professor Volker House also once in his earlier articles also queries whether Islamic economy is a doctrine or Islamic economy is a science. So because there are some confusions if we read the literature on Islamic economics, because we try to mix between the doctrines and we try to mix it with the scientific dimension of Islamic economics. And early writings on Islamic economics, of course, is very much prevalence. It's very obvious in the early writing of Islamic economics is about the Islamic teachings, Islamic teaching in economics. So early writers such as Bakir Sadar or Masud al-Chowdhury, so or Abul Ala al-Maududi, they talk about the doctrines or they talk about the Islamic principles in economics. So that's why in the type 1 definition I put just now is that they define Islamic economic as a doctrine. So they define Islamic economic as a study, is a discipline whereby we study the doctrine of economics and then try to apply the doctrine in the realities. But another scholars also believe that Islamic economic we shouldn't also confine Islamic economic to the doctrine. Islamic economics is just like another discipline; it should be scientific. So I think, in my opinion, we shouldn't make this two dimension in conflicts between doctrines and science, or between system and science, because as I like to always quote Joseph Schumpeter, for example, whereby he mentioned in the scientific, in the economics, which we believe it is a scientific discipline, is always a doctrine. Yeah? For example, we have been doctrinized that human behavior is always self-interest, is always motivated by self-interest. So this is doctrine. This is not scientific, because if it is scientific, we can prove that many other behavior, human beings are motivated also by other types of interests. For example, public interest and even God's interest. God's interest even. So there are doctrines in the science, and there are scientific dimension also in the doctrines. So these two are interchangeably, I think. So we shouldn't, and we cannot, I think, we cannot separate between the doctrine dimensions and the scientific dimension in the disciplines. Both are, we can found it. And for Islamic economic as a science also, we must have doctrines, because these doctrines will act as the foundations, will act as the mabda, and will act as the benchmark whereby we can develop our theories later on and our disciplines. Thank you.
Right. I think, yeah, I think the nature of, doctrines and, different things as they flow into each other in an integrated way, I think that's quite important. And I think if we try to choose one or the other, in the end, we'll have to exclude one. It's better to probably take a synthetic approach and, approach the discipline for, a more inclusive method. So I can see where you're coming from there. The next question, I think, is regards your inclusion of a chapter titled Islamic Economic Thought, right, by Todd Lowry and Pre-Classical Economics, as well as Afzarur Rahman. The idea is that these chapters, or this work, basically identifies Islamic economics in the context of evolution of economic behavior, right? So basically, there's an acknowledgement of Islamic economics in the history of, evolution of economic behavior. Was this included in your elaborate study of definitions? So the question doesn't clarify actually when this chapter was published. Perhaps it was after your your period of study, like after 2015, but it's not mentioned here. But perhaps you can clarify some more.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't get the questions correctly, but I tried to comprehend the questions. Islamic economic history of evolution of economic behavior.
Yeah.
So Islamic economic definition is an evolution of economic behavior, is it?
Basically, there was a chapter which recognized Islamic economics in the context of evolution of economic behavior, meaning basically this is what I understand from the question, that it recognizes Islamic economics in the context of evolution of economic behavior. So
to put behavior there at the end is very much confusing. I think just Islamic economics in the context of evolution of economics, I think.
Right.
So there is a continuation of ideas throughout the history or throughout the human civilizations and contemporary Islamic economics, and maybe we could not separate it from this evolution of thinking or human civilizations. So we have classical Islamic economics in the past. For example, we have scholars such as Abu Yusuf, who wrote Kitab al-Kharaj, and Al-Maqrizi, who wrote on some things on monetary or money. So and they try to produce some things which we call currently as economics. In the past, they don't call it economics because there is no specific disciplines of economics produced in the Islamic civilizations. So the disciplines of economics is only produced later on, in the human civilizations when the West dominate the civilization. So after Ibn Khaldun, actually we have a chance to produce these disciplines called economics. But unfortunately, our civilization at that time is in decline. So and scholars at that time do not think they are able to produce a specific definition, a specific discipline such as economics that we have learned currently. But in terms of ideas, I think, we can see the continuation of ideas from the Greek philosophers, and then move to the Islamic civilizations, and then move to the era of Renaissance, and then move to the Western civilizations ideas. So there are some ideas which are convergence. Which I think we can see some similarities among the scholars in economic ideas. But of course, just like Hellbronner, the making of economic society, mentioned that every society produces its own unique economic theories, and economic theories usually develop in the context of society. So our economic theories currently that we learn in the textbooks is unique to the society of capitalists, or the capitalist society setting, he says. Just so the theory is produced unique to the doctrines, and also unique to the setting of society at that times. This is what Robert Hellbronner argues. So if we can compare, for example, the theory proposed by Abu Yusuf, for example, is unique to the doctrine of Islam at that time, and to the society whereby Abu Yusuf, when he wrote Kitab al-Kharaj at that time. So the same if we compare the theory, for example, later on, produced by conventional or the neoclassical economic theories, or the Keynesian economic theories, are unique to the doctrine. They believe in materialists or in the secular worldview, and to the context of capitalist society settings, as what are the type of society they want to produce. So the theory will prescribe to that goals. So the same thing for Islamic economics currently. Ideally, when we try to produce Islamic economic theories, it also should be unique to the Islamic doctrines, and to the ideals types of societies that we are trying to produce. So unfortunately currently is that our theory is moving not to that direction. So it's moving to justify the context of capitalist society, but with Islamic doctrines. So our theory currently, we are trying to justify our Islamic economic theory to justify the context of a capitalist society, but we try to make it in line with the Islamic doctrine. We can discuss later on this. But I think there is always evolutions of ideas, but these ideas are always unique in each time.
So I think, Dr. Hafaz, I think you made it clear. I think the question here was asking, whether you had overlooked a certain chapter which explicitly mentioned Islamic economics as being part of, economic history. And I think your answer is clear that maybe even though you may have overlooked that one, chapter, your entire thesis does integrate the idea of continuity of ideas, in the discipline. So I think you answered that question in that sense. So perhaps, later on, the person who asked the question can forward the source, and maybe Dr. Hafaz can take a closer look at it. But basically, his answer shows that, it's integrated, it's already sort of accounted for in his study. Okay. The next question I think ties in. I'm going to skip a question here. And we'll come back to that later, because you were just about to go into this area where you were saying that, look, our definition of economics is such and such. And I think this is from Brother Wan Omar Fadli. I think we all know him quite well too as well. He basically says that, do you have your own definition of Islamic economics after studying all these multiple definitions? And, you know, what is closest to your belief? You know, what definition suits what you believe in of Islamic economics?
Thank you, Dr. Wan Omar, for the question. This is very interesting question, and I think it is not only posed to me, because it's posed to us as well as a scientific community in Islamic economics. Do we have our own definition of Islamic economics? And Prof. Aslam has tried to answer it in 1907 when he wrote a paper and tried to define Islamic economics. And for me, I still don't have a specific definition of Islamic economics. When I try to understand what the scholars try to develop in their proposed definition of Islamic economics, I still don't I don't want to develop my own definitions. But I think we can take some common lines. I think some common lines that I have put just now in the conclusions, that when we try to develop Islamic economics, it should be our definition should be the first is comprehensive. It will take care of the dimension of doctrine. It will take care of the dimension of realities, and that should be comprehensive. Because what is lacking in the conventional definition is that they only take half dimensions. For example, in the definition proposed by Robbins, they're focusing on means rather than ends, right? In the definition proposed by Alfred Marshall, for example, it is only look at the dimension of material requisites, in the ordinary business life. So they are lacking of the other dimensions such as spiritual or social dimensions and others. So these are the dimensions that we have to take care when we try to develop our definition of Islamic economics. Of course, if you ask me, I have my own specific definitions, but yet I have to make it solid before I try to propagate it or try to publish it. I have these definitions in another paper that I'm now trying to develop when I discuss about the subject matter of Islamic economics, whereby I see the economic problems in two perspectives. The first is economic problem as life realities, so that we are facing it in real life, such as the poverty, such as the unemployment, scarcity also. So these are the economics problem in our life, real life. And then there is also another dimension of economic problem, which is economics problem as guided by our doctrines or by our teachings or by our principles. How do we solve the problems of poverty, for example? So that becomes our problems. So this is mentioned by Maulana Abul Ala Maududi. So we discussed this scholars in the previous webinar series, right? So Maududi is very interesting on this part, whereby he mentioned in that paper I put quotation from Maulana Abul Ala Maududi, whereby he said that in solving economic problems, we shouldn't confine ourselves to what happens or to what the fact that we are facing. So, for example, we are facing scarcity. We couldn't just solve the problems of scarcity by finding the means based on the facts. But also, we have to solve the problems or the real life problems with the life guidance given by God. So in the what we have in the Quran and Sunnah should be part of our guidance in solving the problems, and that becomes the problem in itself. So we have two problems. The first is the real life problems, and the second is the ideals. The ideals, principles or guidance comes from God that wants to implement it in our real life situation. Yeah? And that becomes a problem in itself and in how we can apply it in our real life. Yeah? So our definition should take care both dimensions. Hopefully I can share what is my definition someday.
I was actually cutting in to say that maybe you can give us an idea of what your definition was leaning towards, which is exactly what you did. So thank you very much. So I'll go back to the previous question, which is also a very interesting question. The question is by Brother Muhammad Adam, and he refers to a Muslim economist from Indonesia known as Adi Warman Karim. And he says that basically this economist proposes the idea of, different Islamic economic madhabs based on differences in ideas. So he wants to know, how does that fit into, the way you perceive a definition of Islamic economics?
Okay, thank you, Brother Muhammad Adam, for the question. So this is very famous in Indonesia. The idea comes from Dr. Adi Warman Karim, yeah, who classified the school of thought in three school of thought. The first is the Bakir Sadar school of thought, and then the second is the mainstream school of thought, which comprises of IDB or IRT scholars, mainstream neoclassical Islamic economics school of thought. And then the third is the alternative school of thought, which is Timur Quran is in the third school of thought. So I haven't come across with another articles that try to come up with, is there any school of thought in Islamic economics? Yeah? We are still yet to have, maybe if my reading is it's not good, maybe if you can share with us, is there any specific other articles or writings from our scholars that try to answer whether in Islamic economic we are now currently have a school of thought or not? In my opinion, we are still not. We still don't have any specific school of thought yet, because if we talk about school of thought, it is a very systematic thought propagated by the scholars, and it has unique methodologies, and then there are foundation and a kind of body of thought. And then there are followers who are trying to propagate that school of thought. So in our Islamic economic cases, we are still yet to have that, because if we see the writing of Islamic economics, sometimes we quote from Bakir Sadar, sometimes we quote from Omar Chapra, sometimes we mix with the Manan, or sometimes so there is no specific group of scholars that try to propagate its own school of thought. So it is not yet becomes a school of thought as in the conventional economics have. For example, classicals. It is very clear this try to propagate the classical ideas in economics. Or Austrian Ludwig von Mises, for example. There are a group of scholars try to propagate this Mises school of thought, or Keynesians, for example. It is So in Islamic economic, we are still mixing each other, and I don't think it is it's already a school of thought. Maybe Prof. Aslam can elaborate on this. Is there any school of thought that we are currently have in Islamic economics, or Prof. Mustafa Omar Muhammad also can say something on this? But in my opinion, we don't have this currently.
I think it's very interesting that you mentioned Prof. Aslam, because he also came to mind when you were, distinguishing between schools, because the word Prof. Aslam used in his book was actually shades. And, I also agree with that, because I think it's more of a variation rather than an entire revolutionary approach to doing economics. So I think probably with more maturity and more depth within each type of thought, perhaps they can develop into schools. But right now, as you say, I think we still have to accept them as different strands of Islamic economic ideas rather than, you know, full-fledged disciplines and things like that. But perhaps, you know, I think maybe the Economic Council members can, you know, take this idea forward. So I'm just putting it out there. I've gone a little beyond the question time intentionally because I see that, you know, it's supposed to be a 1.5 hour session. So I'm accepting a few. I was accepting a bit more, accepting a few extra questions. Those of you who have, you know, put extra sources, perhaps, you know, I think it's a good idea if you can get directly in touch with Dr. Hafaz. You know, one thing you could do it through maybe Brother Firdaus, okay, who's also in this group, and he can analyze the chat and, you know, some of the things that are being forwarded here, and they can go directly to Dr. Hafaz. And I think, you know, there could be some synthesis in what you're saying and what he has done so far, right? So I think maybe that's all we can entertain in terms of questions right now. I have already gone a little over time. I thought there were some very interesting questions from very different areas. Right now on the agenda, what we will do next is we will move into, you know, the council, Economic Council discussion about some of the ideas that were discussed here. Perhaps you know, one of the members can come forward and you know, set the tone for this discussion. Maybe some of the ideas that stood out. Maybe I can get the ball rolling with maybe talking about, you know, is there, I can ask Dr. Hafaz perhaps, is there in your mind a methodology for the definition of Islamic economics? You know, because as you mentioned, it's a living process, right? It's a kind of evolution. It's something, you know, that keeps on integrating and growing. So would you say that, you know, there is a methodology for the definition of Islamic economics? And do you think you can maybe talk about some of the ideas or components of such a methodology, if at all?
Okay, yeah, is there any methodology for definition of Islamic economics? Yeah, basically, when we investigate the definition proposed by scholars, they try to put Islamic approach or methods and not methodology, I think, in the definition of Islamic economics. We can see their approach try to always relate it with the Islamic norms, Islamic approach or Islamic solution. So in this case, I believe that unlike the definition in conventional economics, which is only focusing on means, and this leads to the positivistic methodology or positivism, logical positivism, because it's only dealing with the life as it is, or with the economic problems as it is, because means we are talking about facts rather than normative dimensions in economics. So in the case of Islamic economics, I think scholars try to scholars understand what are the problems in the conventional definition of economics, and one of the problems is that in trying to solve the economic problems, we are bounded with the logical positivism approach. So because what we mean by facts or what we mean by economic problem is the one that we have falsified, or the one that we have confirmed or verified in the empirical findings or empirical evidence. Other than that, it is not considered as problems. But in Islamic cases, there are many things that we are not, we cannot clarify with the evidence. And also there are many things also that it is beyond these empirical facts or empirical findings. And that should be counted also as our problems, as our economic problems. So that's why when they try to propose the definition of Islamic economics, they try to enlarge this methodology or approach or methods in solving economic problems to also include the dimension of the spiritual dimensions, the social dimensions, and also the moral dimensions in the definitions. So in this case, I think Islamic economists has enriched the definition of economics in Islamic perspective, as compared to the conventional definition of economics. I think that.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Does anybody want to carry on the train of thought, perhaps?
Can I just, okay, can I speak something? I don't know whether...
Yeah, your video is on, sir.
My video is on. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Your audio is coming through.
So Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Hafaz. I think, like just the moderator said, you have covered a lot of dimension in this definition of Islamic economics. And I like the idea in which you have classified it as a doctrine, subject matter, the goals of Islamic economics, and then the behavior aspects of those definitions. I think this categorization is very, very important. But at the same time, I just would like to look at some of the missing link, which could have made the efforts more comprehensive. And this, I picked it up from some of the questions that were asked. I think 2 questions were asked from the audience. One was that why you could not include much of the classical literature, and somebody talks about Afzalur Rahman and other few literature. In fact, I would even go more far, that there are a lot of early books, and although he also mentioned a few of those classical schools, but I think those are very, very important work that would give another dimension to the definition of Islamic economics. Books like Shaybani's book, and you could also derive spirits from a lot of other works, Makarizi, etc. So the other interesting thing also which we asked from the audience was, how do you, which part of that definition you would consider it as constant, and the other definition that would change based on changes of time and place? And I think that's a very interesting question. So to my mind, when you look at one of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the hadith says that on the day of Qiyamah, that we will be asked 4 difficult questions. لا تزول قدم عبد يوم القيامة حتى يسأل عن 4. A person will be asked 4 important questions. And among these 2 questions, among the 4, 2 questions are related to his economic life. عن ماله من أين اكتسبه وفيما أنفقه. He will be asked about his wealth, where he derived that wealth from, how he earned that wealth. So earning becomes a very important aspect. وفيما أنفقه, and how he spent that wealth. So earning and spending becomes a very constant variable in those definitions if we go by this hadith. But how these earnings and spending evolve over time would become a matter of how we look at those definitions. And I also share the view of the presenter that for the last 30 years, which is very unfortunate, and we have to blame ourselves, and we have to move forward, that there has nothing concrete or substantial in the definition of Islamic economics. So my view is that we have been moving up and down because the basis in which we have been trying to define Islamic economics are all from the conventional paradigm. That is why we remain stuck. So we move from A, we move from B. There's nothing wrong to benefit from the conventional definition, but it should not be the basis from where we start. Maybe if we begin developing from our Turath, we could see the light at the end of the tunnel. So this is my humble contribution. Jazakumullah khair.
I would also just want to throw idea to Dr. Hafaz and also the other Islamic economic scholars, Prof. Aslam and also Dr. Yasad and also Dr. The most important thing is to be just. And we talk based on the discipline, like in Dr. Hafaz's paper on definition of Islamic economics. Like we focus on the discipline itself, right? Islamic economics discipline. So what is the ultimate objective when we just focus? Of course, the ultimate objective is al-falah for all the discipline of knowledge. At the end of the day, we want to achieve al-falah. But based on the Islamic economics, in the context of that discipline itself, what is the ultimate objective? And is it just the ultimate objective? When you are just, you can achieve the ultimate objective that is promoting. I mean, the ultimate objective is for the well-being of mankind. At the end of the day, so do we? I mean, just to throw an idea, to throw idea. So like social, can we say that the objective of is promoting socio-economic justice within the discipline of economics itself, the Islamic. So can we define Islamic economics based on the ultimate objective of Islamic economics? So actually, what is the ultimate objective of Islamic economics? Can we say the ultimate objective of Islamic economics is to achieve the socio-economic justice? So when we are just, can we contribute to the well-being of the mankind? And can we define the Islamic economics? So these are my questions. Share. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Mustafa and Dr. Latifa. I think so perhaps the idea of justice underlying, economic principles is sort of qualified by what Dr. Mustafa was saying earlier, like looking at the hadith and, like the Turat and the specific literature regarding how that justice is supposed to be manifested. So I think there's definitely, a meeting ground there, So there are many aspects of justice being applied in many different areas, right? And I think it's about collating all of that and moving towards, how does that manifest and what economic, tools can be used or do we have that can actually, lead to that form of justice. I think Dr. Hafaz also referred to Imam Maududi earlier, right? And he has some very interesting ideas on how social justice is to be achieved using, economic institutions and the frameworks that are already built into Islam. So I think that's a great way forward, right? In terms of that. Perhaps Prof. Aslam.
Yeah, thank you very much, thank you, Brother Hafaz, for that presentation. I think we had, of course, many years of discussion on this topic during the PhD thesis, and if you remember, we had added advantage of having we had our late Zakaria Man with us, who was also on the committee, and we had Dr. Isham, Pawan, who was always giving very interesting inputs. Let me just try to give a couple of points on what maybe the overall theme of today's topic, which is on trying to define Islamic economics. In philosophy, you talk about this in the area called ontology. All right, so we are trying to discuss subject matter. What is the subject matter, and closely connected to that is what is the scope. I think in any definition that we want to come up with, these two important points should be there. Even if it is not directly there, it should give some idea, right? So I always give the example, if you find a book without a cover and you just see the table of content, when you read the table of content, would you know that this is economics? Right? So we must be able, just from looking at table of content, we must be able to say this is economics. Right? So in that context, would our definition of Islamic economics, how similar and how different would it be from one modern economics but also from, if somebody says Buddhist economics or, Christian economics, how would Islamic economics differ? I think this, so not only from modern economics, we need to have differentiation, all right, but also from the other alternatives that may be out there. And so in that context, we have to ask ourselves, how different do we want to be? All right. So that definition that we give, on the one hand, must be able to represent what makes Islamic economics Islamic, but at the same time, it must speak the language that everybody who is talking about economics can relate to, or else you will be discussing a different subject matter. So that's the first point. The second point is, in the process of elaborating the definition, because I think this is where many of the questions asked today about the different people who have tried to define Islamic economics, and even the question about, do we have school of economics? The challenge will be when you want to elaborate. Okay, so there may even be a person who agrees on the definition, but when it comes to elaborating the definition, they differ. Yeah. So if we want to develop Islamic economics discipline, I think we have to go not only to the level of definition, but in that elaboration process, so that we can all agree, maybe to disagree, right? So I may have the same definition, but as I discuss scarcity, for example, I have a different view of scarcity compared to somebody else. And then at the end of the day, we must be able to sit down, all of us. I think Dr. Hafaz put it nicely, the Islamic economics community, we have to sit down and we have to be able to try and logically and coherently put the different views into certain, ultimately schools. But I don't think we have come to the point of schools yet. Yeah. My final point, when Dr. Hafaz gives his type 1, type 2, I think previously it was 1A, 1B, right? If I'm not mistaken, yeah. So now he has decided to have four definitions. Okay. And I tell this always to the class. I don't know whether anybody from the class is here, but I always, when I use that article that Hafaz did, I always say that I may agree, I may not have a problem with the way the 4 definitions, yeah, subject matter, doctrine, objective, economic problem, and human behavior. But I may disagree that I am in type 3. I may think I am in type 2, and similarly for others lah. So this process of, I think, a lot of discussion and debate needs to happen, so that we can actually come to an agreement. How we go about. Dr. Hafaz has taken a very good starting point to present these 4 possible types of definition, but I think we need to discuss a bit further and try to clarify, try to get some kind of consensus on this. Yeah, so these are just a few points maybe to think about, and we look forward maybe to the next session. Yeah, Wallahu a'lam.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Prof. Aslam, for your valuable insights as well. I think the way the discussion has progressed, there are like so many mountains to climb suddenly, and there's so much uncharted territory. I think definitely, like, we have to keep. We just need more definition, like more discussions to even identify that starting point. For example, does a definition come out of elaboration, or do you have to define first, and then elaborate on that, like, because which approach even comes first, even that is subjective. So there are so many areas, and I think essentially, like, when we ask these questions, we're trying to find a method, to synthesize all these definitions, right? Which is why I was talking about could there be a methodology for even the definition, like how we approach a definition and what would its components include, right? And another thing I think we need to talk about is these definitions have to be in context, and meaning that, you know, in current economic frameworks. And the problem is that when we do that, often the narrative gets hijacked by, you know, conventional modes of economics as well. And finding that space, because, you know, yes, we can talk about definitions a lot and we can, you know, agree on something, but is that a definition, for example, that the, you know, practitioners will take up, that academic curricula will accept as well? That's also another part of it. Like, okay, let's say with that we do have these definitions. To what extent do we get, are these accepted? And how do we get them to be accepted as well is such a big part of the discussion as well. So
Reza, can I just make
sure.
one quick point, because I forgot to say it just now. When you mentioned that I had given an earlier talk, I think you said philosophy of Islamic economics, but actually today's session is probably talking about one aspect of the philosophy of Islamic economics.
Right.
What I presented was philosophy and economics and Islamic economics. So my presentation was actually saying we need to have the elements of philosophy to assist us in developing Islamic economics. And one of the features of philosophy is the need to be having critical thinking, to question, right? To question something, not to take something until we have been shown evidence. Of course, when we talk about evidence, it's not just empirical evidence, but evidence from our point of view. So my talk was actually philosophy and Islamic economics. Why we need to have, you know, benefit from philosophical discourse to help us develop Islamic economics. And this may take a long time. You know, it may not be solved in 1 or 2 or 3 1.5 hour sessions. I think this is going to be our challenge.
Right. So yeah, agreed. Like I remember that there were a lot of in that talk, basically there were a lot of elements which are not defined, and therefore as a result we're not able to even put a finger on what exactly is social justice and what does, for example, rationalism in Islam mean. So, you know, that was a very important discussion there as well. And so, of course, on the one hand, we need philosophy, you know, Islamic philosophy developing the Turath, as well as, you know, economic ideas also developing within that context. So the two need to happen hand in hand. So I think maybe a starting point would be how using Dr. Hafaz's, you know, categorizations, the initial classifications, let's say the had and fasal, and then even developing towards those areas and finding maybe the right balance. Because for me, I think Islamic economics needs to be more inclusive than, you know, restrictive. I think as soon as we start saying that, look, Islamic economics should not be about this, I think this is where, in my opinion, I think this is where we're restricting ourselves. I think we need to, Islamic economics needs to be more plural. That means open to all kinds, especially alternative economics, right? But at the same time, it also needs to disengage, for example, with, as Dr. Hafaz said, with, you know, the current form, like let's say the neoclassical form, or, you know, the American form of capitalism, let's say the Anglo-Saxon version of capitalism. So it needs to delineate itself with some ideas, but at the same time, it needs to engage with the increasing alternative narrative that's coming up. Because I think, as you mentioned, like there is a need to differentiate with other forms of religious economics, Professor, as you mentioned, in the ontological aspects. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of common ground. And I think there are these other schools which have moved forward philosophically where we can actually find a lot of overlap. And I think there's a lot of value added there, you know, in alternative economics. Maybe Dr. Hafaz, you can add to, the, you know, all of this, because I think your the way you've classified, I think it's a good way of moving forward and finding the right balance, perhaps, you know, in, you know, having future discussions.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for the comments, from Prof. Aslam and then Prof. Mustafa Omar, and also Dr. Latifa and Badr Yasar also. This really put us in a very correct direction, so whereby we still have a very long way to go, and very and much things need to be settled, at least in our generation of Islamic economics community, because for example, in the disciplines, and the area that we need to solve in the discipline is that we need to have first subject matter, a clear subject matter. And this subject matter, if we refer back to the definition, we at least have 4 types of subject matters, which is not yet very clear. And then we need also to have a body of knowledge. So body of knowledge comes from the foundation of knowledge. So in the foundation itself, we are still lacking what else to the body of knowledge. And then we need to have methodology. So methodology also, Islamic economics do not have a clear directions in the what type of methodology that Islamic economics could have. So currently we are still in the using the logical positivism's methodology in the case of Islamic economics, which are dominant for Islamic economics disciplines. And then in theory, in the dimension of theory, so we are still also lacking to produce our own unique theory of Islamic economics. So what we have achieved currently is that we Islamize the existing theories. So to produce theories, it is we are thankful to Professor Mustafa Omar mentioned just now. We need to sometimes look back to our turas or to our traditions or to our classical scholars. They have tried to develop Islamic economic theories, but we abandon those contributions. For example, just now about the theory of kasab, theory of infaq. So this could be our theories, and we can develop economics models based on those theories. And in fact, if we are talking about Shaybani's economy, for example, so the subject matter of Islamic economics, according to Shaybani, is about kasab and infaq. Al-kasbu and infaq. So these are the subject matter, the object of study for Islamic economics. How we do kasab and how we do infaq. So Islamic economic is about these 2 dimensions, kasab and infaq. And perhaps other scholars also from the classical Islamic tradition also, they have come up with another interesting subject matter when they discuss about the economic dimension. About the falah just now, Dr. Latifa, it is only come up lately in the contemporary Muslim scholars. So our classical Islamic scholars never talk about falah. They talk about sa'adah. For example, Al-Farabi has a book on Tahsilus Sa'adah. So they discuss about the happiness, about Sa'adah. Sa'adah in Islamic perspective, or happiness in perspective, not falah. Falah is only come out later on in maybe Muhammad Akram Khan paper, when he popularized the word falah. So our classical Islamic scholars talk about Sa'adah, including Al-Ghazali also. Al-Ghazali has books on Kimia Sa'adah. So if we talk about the goals, so they talk about Sa'adah. So this can be our, when we develop theories, we can develop theories of Sa'adah. And that theory is unique in Islamic perspective, because when the scholars discuss about Sa'adah, they discuss it in a very broad perspective. Unlike the theory of utility theory is very much narrow and very much one direction only. But Sa'adah is very comprehensive theory. If we are able to develop it, and if we can prove it maybe mathematically or through findings, empirical findings, it's very interesting theory. So I agree with what we have discussed about the classical turas, and in the previous discussion, I think we need to have a continued discussion on this, and we discuss a specific books produced by scholars, and then first we have to understand what the scholars try to talk about, and then later on we try to come up with the contemporary perspective on the ideas, the scholars' ideas. So the theory of Sa'adah, I think, is very much interesting if we are able to elaborate this. I think that's all. And another interesting direction that we have currently is that we have now various Islamic economics. So, for example, Professor Mehmet Asute tried to develop Islamic moral economy. And Professor Fahim Khan tried to develop Islamic institutional economy. So they try to bring a specific dimension of Islamic economics which are different to the conventional economics. So this is to answer the challenge posed by Prof. Aslam just now about how we can differentiate what we want to be for Islamic economics. So for Prof. Mehmet Asute, he wants to differentiate it through moral economy. So Islamic moral economy and other types of economy, Islamic gift economy, for example, Islamic institutional economy. But I'm not sure whether Islamic economic scientific community will agree on this thought or not. Because it is up to the scientific community to choose the direction for Islamic economics. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's hopefully what I have shared benefits to all of us, and kindly forgive me if I have shortcomings. And Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamu warahmatullah. I think it's a nice way that you've ended, because if you look at the concept that you mentioned, like the concept of falah, sa'ada, and a discussion into that would be akin to looking at, the turath or the philosophy and Islam's definition of such concepts, right? And then if you look at the second thing that you mentioned, like Prof. Fahim Khan's institutional economy and Mehmet Asute's moral economy, we're actually looking at manifestations of those ideals, in terms of an economic framework. So perhaps, we can go top down and bottom up and, each within their own interest and start from there. And perhaps, we'll find Islamic economics in the middle, the definition. So I think maybe both approaches would be and lead us to, an integrated and, a more comprehensive approach, inshallah. So I thought it was a nice way for you to end, on this note. Like, I think that's what we need to do. We need to look at it. Another thing is when we look at if, for example, our objective is consensus, getting everybody to agree, I think we need to take an approach where there is a common or shared value, which basically means going closer to the Quran and the source, and then moving forward from there as well. So I think this emphasizes the idea that Prof. Aslam and Dr. Mustafa mentioned, like, starting with the philosophy, the Turath, defining things, and then moving forward is just as important as, would probably be the most plausible place to start, right? I will not, stretch the session any further. What I will do is I will invite Dr. Latifa to perhaps, give us some concluding statement and, a sense of direction of, what's to come, perhaps, how this dialogue can continue, and maybe a preview into the next part of the series, inshallah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yasad, and thank you to Dr. Hafaz Furkani. It's really useful and insight information today, yeah? And we really appreciate that you managed to share these things, and also like certain things like really trigger us, yeah, in order to think, yeah, on the definition of Islamic economics. And in the next section, inshallah, we will go into concept of Islamic economics, but we will determine the date later. Yeah, a discussion on the concepts of Islamic economics. For today, definition, I think all of us have rough idea, yeah, on all the definitions that have been given by many scholars that presented by Dr. Hafaz Furqani. Inshallah, we will try to continue with the series of concept of Islamic economics in the near future. We will inform the date, inshallah. And maybe Dr. Mustafa have. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Once again, I would like to thank everybody. Am I visible, by the way? I cannot.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'd like to thank again the International Center for Research in Islamic Economics and Finance under Dr. Latifa. I would like to also thank the members of the team who have attended and participated. I would like to thank the international participation, those who are logged into our webinar. And of course, our speaker, Dr. Hafaz Furqani, I agree with Dr. Latifa. He has done quite extensively to tell us all the different dimensions in the literature related to the definition of Islamic economics. And don't forget our moderator, who has done a lot of value added to our work today. And finally, I thank my PA, Brother Firdaus, for the good work, especially the last minute that I was trying to come in. So he became, technician par excellence to bring me in. So inshallah, hopefully we again meet in the next session to be determined by Dr. Latifa, and we end our session by the recitation of Surah Al-Asr. وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.